Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and begin today's session with Reverend James Lawson. I'd like to welcome you to the third public event with Reverend James Lawson, Jr. We are extremely excited to have all of you here today, as well as very excited to have James Lawson with us. He's a visiting scholar to join us in our campus-wide initiative on civil discourse and social change, as he continues to shed light on prevailing issues and offer a tremendously successful solution through the active strategy of nonviolence. Each one of our events has required the reservation of a larger space for this event to take place. And without fail, today's turnout here in the Plaza de Sol Performance Hall is no exception. Your attendance not only portrays our campus's desire to open larger physical spaces for these types of events, but rather a desire to open larger conversational spaces to discuss the matters that are prevailing in our local campus and global community. And for that, give yourselves a round of applause. My name is Justin Weiss, and I'm the coordinator of Unify We Serve, the volunteer program here at Cal State University in Northridge. Together with Dr. Catherine Sorrells, professor in the Department of Communication Studies, Marta Lopez Garza, professor of Gender and Women's Studies, and Chicano Studies, have been working along with students, faculty, and staff since last spring to create and implement our campus initiative. We are in a time where the adverse effects of political and economic decisions have manifested into social climate that is taking its toll on those most affected by it. Locally, issues of increased tuition and the cutting of classes have forced our students into drastically challenging conditions. Globally, the need for our jobs, increased death tolls from war, and families scared at the risk of deportation has placed a heavy burden on those facing these circumstances. I know some of you out there in attendance today, as well as those watching from the webcast, are affected by these conditions. Or maybe you have empathy for those facing those conditions. Because of that, you may feel marginalized, fragmented, or isolated. You may ask, does anybody care? Well, I care. And by being here, I know that you care. And through this initiative, we're able to create a space where together we can come together and care as one entity. Our initiative on social discourse and civil discourse and social change is providing opportunities for CSUN to be a place where access to alternative perspectives can be heard. And while these perspectives may differ from your own, we now have the opportunity for students, faculty, staff, administrators, and civic members to come together as one community to learn appreciation for our differences while becoming aware of how similar as human beings we really are. While competing forces use our different positions, opinions, and perspectives against each other, our civil discourse affords us the ability to put our issues on the table and find resourceful solutions for creating social change. Imagine if we viewed each one of us as if we were family. We would begin to work for the same privileges, resources, and opportunities that we would want for our own family members. But it begins with each one of us. The initiative does not end after Reverend Lawson concludes his lecture tonight. It continues by recognizing our potential and ability to create change. Gandhi, whom Reverend Lawson gained much of his teachings from, articulated that it is possible for a teacher situated miles away to affect the spirit of his pupils by his or her way of living. Gandhi goes on to explain that it would be idle for me if I were a liar to teach people to tell the truth. A cowardly teacher would never succeed in making his students valiant, and a stranger to self-restraint could never teach his or her pupils the value of self-restraint. So in other words, the initiative is in all of you. With that being said, I'd like to go ahead and thank our supporters today, which include an impressive list, such as student organizations, the American Indian Studies Association, Black Student Union, Chicano Graduate Student Association, CSUN Communication Association, Dreams to be Heard, Gender and Women's Studies Student Association, MECHA, Performance Ensemble, Women's Research and Resource Center. In addition, I'd like to also thank academic departments, such as the American Indian Studies, Art, Anthropology, Asian American Studies, Central American Studies, Chicana Studies, Communication Studies, English, Gender and Women's Studies, Journalism, Queer Studies Program, Pan-African Studies, and Sociology. Additionally, I'd like to thank the administrative offices such as the College of Humanities, the Mike Kerb College of Arts, Media, and Communication, Office of the Provost, Academic Affairs, Office of Student Affairs, Oviatt Library, Unify We Serve, the volunteer program at CSUN. We'd also like to thank Dr. Sheena Malhotra, Chair of Gender and Women's Studies, for the beautiful website she developed, and also Jessica Arana, our graphic artist. We are inviting others to our list who may also be interested in supporting this initiative. So if you know a club or organization who would like to be a part of this, please get in contact with us. Additionally, there's other ways to get involved with this initiative, such as attending the Social Justice Poetry Lounge, which takes place Wednesday, October 20th from 7 to 9 p.m. in the University Student Union Games Room. Also, our next public event with Reverend Lawson will take place on November 22nd here in the Performance Hall. So please bring your friends, your fellow students, anybody who you know who may be interested in actually making a difference. For more information, you can visit the website at www.csun.edu/CDSC. Furthermore, I would like to announce that we are dedicating this whole series to Karen Duran, our fellow colleague and librarian who recently passed. Also, as a housekeeping tip, I would please ask you to turn off your cell phone so there's no distraction today as well. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our next speaker, the president of our fine institution, Dr. Jolene Koester, who will make some remarks, and I'd like to thank her for her continued support. So without further ado, please let's welcome President Dr. Jolene Koester.
Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you who are here. Most of you, I think, are members of the Cal State Northridge community. There may be some community members here. I certainly hope that some of you have joined us as well. In the previous two lectures and discussions that Reverend Lawson has led, my colleagues in the university administration, Provost Harry Hillenbrand, and Vice President for Student Affairs, William Watkins, have eloquently spoken to the place and importance of Reverend Lawson's work historically and in contemporary times. I wish to direct all of you to understand why a university is a critical and important place for these conversations. Universities are places in which ideas should run free. Universities are places in which opinions should be able to be freely expressed. Universities are places in which there should be genuine argument in the best possible sense of that word, argument. My discipline is communication as well, so I see argument positively valenced, where there can be vigorous debate with opposing points of view, multiple opposing points of view. Because if universities cannot be such places, then oh my, we must fear for our overall civilization and our democracy. In the university, it is our responsibility not necessarily to take a side, but to assure that all of the sides are there. In the university, it is our responsibility to assure that all of the voices can be heard and listened to in a respectful and civil way. I find this series particularly compelling. Yes, because we in the state of California have experienced budget reductions that have created fractures, additional fractures, and additional problems within our university. But more importantly, I find this series to be compelling and mandatory for our university to learn from, because I fear that civil discourse and dialogue are dying in our society. It is very difficult to have a conversation across differences. People are labeled. People are challenged. Ad hominem attacks are frequent. Talk shows on television set up antagonists and have people who are hired by the talk show to prevent physical violence between and among those people that they've invited to talk. Such a shame it is to see the character of discourse in what we now consider to be civilized society. So I too join with the organizers of this event in celebrating the value propositions that Reverend Lawson presents, in celebrating the role that all of us in the university have in preserving multiple voices, in preserving conversation, in preserving dialogue, in preserving civil discourse. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of a university such as California State University, Northridge.
Good afternoon, everybody. On the evening of March 4th, 2010, I, Janee Thompson, awakened from a 5-year period of hibernation, 5 years of inactivity and metabolic stagnation. I woke up that morning with my mind stayed on educational freedom. At the time, I did not realize that a mind set on freedom would lead to myself, along with 4 others, being arrested. I would no longer be Janee. I would become troublemaker and problem child. Others called me Rosa Parks. I like that one. When I expressed the core values of this university, open dialogue and the free and respectful expression of differing points of view, I realized that I was leading the risk of being arrested. I did not realize that my actions would disturb and sadden my school president. I did not realize that my actions would be deemed as less responsible and disruptive to the very neighbors and community members that marched with us. I did not realize that I would hold the dual task of fighting for quality education and fighting a court case brought upon me by the very university that I stood in protest for. I say today that no form of punishment is greater than the cause that I am fighting for. I stand before you as a more than proud CSUN student. I watched over 5,000 students, faculty, and community members come together on that great day and stand up for what is right and what is just. I have watched another group continue to spread the fire that was ignited on that great day. We are here today because of what happened on that great day. Mohandas Gandhi referenced the story of Jesus Christ of Nazareth by saying, "A man who was completely innocent offered himself as a sacrifice for the good of others, including his enemies, and became the ransom of the world. It was a perfect act." I say these words in reference to James Lawson of Pennsylvania. At the age of 19 years old, Reverend Lawson would spend 13 months in jail for being a conscious objector and refusing to report to the draft during the Korean War. At the age of 29, he would hold seminars to train civil rights activists in Gandhian tactics of nonviolent direct action. Drawing on the examples of Christ's suffering, teaching Black and white students how to organize sit-ins and any form of action that would force America to confront the immorality of segregation. At the age of 33, he would coordinate freedom rides, strategically placing Blacks and whites side by side on buses. This would defy the unjust laws that called for separate but equal. At the age of 38 years old, he would participate in the Meredith March from Nashville to Mississippi to register Blacks to vote in an effort to continue on with the mission of the slain James Meredith. At the age of 40 years old, he would participate in the sanitation workers' strike. He would also be recognized by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world. Reverend James Lawson has continued to offer himself as a sacrifice for the good of others, now more than ever. He has been arrested for civil disobedience over the last 10 years than he ever was during the 1950s and 1960s. Lawson has continued to protest over poverty, gay and lesbian rights, immigration rights, Palestinian rights, racial profiling, and the opposition over the unjust war in Iraq. In 2010, two phenomenal women would utter the same words to Reverend Lawson that Dr. King had 53 years ago. "Come now. We don't have anyone like you down here." At the age of 82 years old, you're young to me, 28, we have Reverend Lawson here. Help me welcome him to Cal State University Northridge.
I'm not going to use the podium, as you can see. I'm going to be here in front. I'm sure everyone see me. It's a beautiful performing arts center with the seats arranged in such a fashion that I can stand here and walk back and forth. And so I'm going to do this third lecture from this posture. I'm hoping today that we can accomplish perhaps three things. First of all, I want to open up further the whole business of nonviolent struggle as a science for social change, a science for creative and just social change, as a science which shows how it can be done and effectively across the last 110 years, and beyond our imagination, beyond even the books, because in the fields of history and sociology and political science and government, in many ways, the academic world has pretty well ignored the 110-year history of nonviolent action and social change across the whole globe, in fact. So we do not understand it as being a valuable intrusion of information, historical experience, on the part of literally millions and millions of people who've been able to affect change in themselves and in their societies through essentially nonviolent struggle and action. Now let me say a word of appreciation to the President and to the Vice President of Student Affairs and to Janetta. Huh? Johnny. What's? Janee, Jon, with the umlaut, right? Yeah, okay. All right, good. I just want to express my very deep appreciation for both of these very fine comments, and Justin's comment too. I see you over here. But they're very thought-provoking, and also they help us to focus in on the meaning of this whole series. I want to thank the university that there is the creativity and the sensibility about the times in which we live to see this kind of a process, not a staid a classical classroom teaching seminars and so forth, but rather my being here for 10 major events in which I try to outline the whole importance of our topic and the rest, and a part of my own experience within that context. It is true that the university must be the place of ideas. If it is not, we're in greater trouble than what we know. I'm a religionist, I'm a theologian, a pastor of 45 years or so, but I do not think that in the religion and in the churches there's the role for the free exchange of truth and science and understandings. There is not the place there for the sense of looking at the human family, and from that look, from that observation, from that a deep study and understanding, then putting together the ways in which we need to think and act. This is not for me to disparage the religious institutions, but to simply say that's not been their role, no matter how much I may have wished it otherwise. The university is the place not only for ideas, but it's the place where you, a new generation, come along, and you come along as a new generation. You have the opportunity to study, to learn. You have the privilege of being in this privileged position because in your generation, those of you as students, probably only around 8 to 10% of the people of your generation around the world have this opportunity to be in a university and to learn thereby, to become aware of a different kind of world than what often we are taught conventionally, a different kind of world than appears on television, videos, newspapers, even magazines, and the rest of it. So you are a special group of people. As Justin said, one of the most important things that we can do is to become aware of the fact that the human race, especially through too much of our leadership on the national levels across the world, is not taking good care of this precious thing that is life and of the infinite potential for human beings that we've not yet begun to even touch or tap, period. And that in not taking care of the precious gift of human life, we have tended not to take care of one another. The truth of the matter is, of course, that if indeed we had a society where a public discourse, that in itself would be a sign of our taking better care of ourselves and of one another. I was thinking this past week, and I'm changing my script entirely. I was thinking this past week, as I've watched the explosion of articles in the print media, at least, of the young people who already wrestling with who they are and what they are about, and wrestling therefore with their own sexuality, have committed suicide from harassment and intimidation. And there have been front page stories around the country on some of these, on this matter. I wanted to say something like this about it. That in fact, bullying and intimidation and harassment has unfortunately been a part of the hallmark, the underbelly hallmark of our society, whether we have talked about it or not. The bullying of the Indian people the bullying of the Mexican people, the harassment and intimidation heaped upon the first Chinese who were imported into California 200 years ago to build the railroads, to do some of the hard work that needed to be done. The bullying of women across the board, the intimidation and harassment. This is not to mention slavery and Jim Crow law and behavior. The bullying today of the immigrant people in our midst in so many different ways. Now, that has been a public process that has been oftentimes allowed by the society and supported by it. And so today, at a time of our greater diversity, the need for us to be more open than ever before to one another and to our common humanity, to our common pains, to our common possibilities, we find ourselves in serious ways without common discourse. In one of the lectures already, I said that the whole business of trying to put on us labels, conservative, liberal, centrist, leftist, rightist, communist, socialist, all of those labels are very much, in my judgment, very much like racial epithets. They are labels devised, I believe, by the powers that be in order for us to think that we really don't have that many human options, that the limits are more than our possibilities. And I trust that in the process of my being here and our being able to talk, we will somehow try to open up the conversation that will help us at least to begin to demand and advocate in our families, in our homes, on campus, in the places where we live and work and play, begin to demand conversation that is open, that is respectful of one another. One of the great principles of nonviolent science, of nonviolent action, is this: that human beings are so important in creation that every child, every young person, every man, every woman is to be treated with fundamental human dignity and respect, no matter how vigorously we may be in disagreement. There are people in the world today, there are people in the United States who can be called people who ideologically believe still that the earth is flat. It doesn't matter the spaceships that are have moved past Mars, is on the outer edges of our universe. It doesn't matter the literally hundreds and thousands and millions of images that telescopes and space capsules have sent back to JPL and to NASA and to other laboratories and many universities across the world. They believe the earth is flat. Such persons, I maintain, I want to respect, even though I know that they are fundamentally mistaken. They've allowed themselves to stay in the first century of this era, or in the third century of this era. They have not paid attention to the way in which human beings across the earth have been observing their universe, our universe, been listening to it even, watching it, taking photos of it, and discovering more knowledge in the last 100 years than our ancestors in the previous 500,000 years have about themselves, about their universe, or about the earth itself in relationship to the sun. I want to now move very quickly and very briefly to telling you how I came to the term nonviolence myself personally and began to use it for myself. I am the son, I'm a very peculiar person. I am the son of immigrants. Yet, I am also a sixth generation person rooted in the United States. I'm the son of immigrants, but I'm rooted in at least 6 generations of a family from the United States. Let me explain. My great-great-great-great-grandfather and grandmother were slaves in the United States. In the African slavery that destroyed millions and millions of Africans and dislodged that society so that even today it feels its effects. My forebears, my great-grandfather and my grandfather escaped slavery as very young people. My grandfather was perhaps only between 10 and 12. We have not been able to find out how old he was. His father was maybe 19 or 20 when they connived their escape from what we think was Virginia slavery and made their way up through the Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, or someplace, we're not sure of the route they took, and arrived in a place that's called Guelph, Ontario in Canada. You may or may not know the history of slavery, but that one of the ways in which slaves protested slavery was to get on their shoes and scheme to get out of it. And some went down into Florida and joined the Seminole Indians. Others from Oklahoma and Arkansas and Texas from Oklahoma went into Mexico, which did not allow slavery and which welcomed them as citizens of Mexico. So getting out of it was one of the ways people protested, usually very quietly in their preparations and the rest of it. Well, my grandfather and great-grandfather ended up in Guelph in what was called the Queen's Bush, a large acreage of land, and my family and I have visited it from time to time. And there they established, my great-grandfather established a farm. My father, when he was born in 1883 in Guelph, Ontario, decided as a very young person, and I don't even know the story, that as soon as he was able, he was going to immigrate to the United States, become a citizen immediately, and live here. So I am the son of immigrants. My mother, at age 18, left Jamaica because she thought she had a chance for a better opportunity in the United States. She immigrated to New York, Jamestown, New York, where my father and mother met, and the rest is a part of my own history. So I'm a peculiar person. I'm a son of immigrant people. And yet I'm also a sixth-generational American. I say that primarily indicate the way in which, in fact, our diversity is far vaster than what we have ever thought in the last 30 or 50 years, period. My parents were very strong people who had a sense of their own dignity and refused to take the stuff and nonsense that they found in the United States of prejudice and racism and the rest. And so that spirit, I think, became a part of my own life and flesh. And I met racial prejudice for the first time in the streets of Massillon, Ohio, at around the age of 4. And when in the parks or on the street, and that's a whole other story, I would get called racial slurs and epithets. I used my fists immediately. At age 4, those fists were not very big. And I do not to this day know why I did this, but I slapped, I kicked, I screamed, I fought. So that anyone who did it once would learn that they could not and would not do it in my presence again. I was in the 4th grade at Horseman Elementary School. And I rushed home from school one beautiful spring afternoon. And my mother met me at the door saying, "Jimmy, I have an errand for you," because I was the oldest boy at the time, and I was the errand boy. I ran all sorts of errands for my parents, which was a good thing because I learned banking almost before I was 10 or 11 years of age. And she gave me whatever it was she had wanted me to do, and I immediately charged out of the back door of our house and through the backyard and across to an alley over to First Avenue, and literally ran up First Avenue to Main Street in Massillon, Ohio, and I turned the corner to the left on Main Street to run this errand, which I do not remember whatever it was about. But as I turned that corner, there was a parked car with the windows wide open. And as I passed, a white child, I do not remember boy or girl, stuck his or her head up through the window and stood on the seat and yelled the N-word at me. And I walked over to the car and I simply smacked the child. We were not that too different in age, as I recall. I went on and ran the errand. I returned home the same route, went through the alleyway, back and through the long backyard, into the back door of an enclosed porch, into the kitchen. And my mother was still in the kitchen, and so I reported to her whatever this errand was about. And then I sat down in a favorite chair that we all had and proceeded to tell her some of the other parts of my errand and told her about this slap, this youngster in the car and the slap. And it's one of the most shaping experiences I've ever had. And she was, if I'm sitting here in the chair by the kitchen door, she's right perhaps about the aisle, standing at a stove with her back to me. And I shall never get the experience. She begins by saying, as I told her about slapping this youngster, she began by saying, "Well, Jimmy, what good did that do?" And we were a solid family of the church, and we were a family of love and music. And she went on to say other things about who I was and our family's life, our church's life, and about how something like that could not possibly hurt me, no matter that I knew who I was. I don't remember the whole soliloquy that she engaged in her normal voice, her back busy at the stove. And then I do not remember the outline of that soliloquy. I remember only, "Jimmy, what good did that do?" I remember her last sentence. There she said, "Jimmy, there must be a better way." Now, this experience has to be best understood in the language and religion of what is called mysticism. A good bit of authentic religion is mystical religion. There are experiences you have that you cannot explain, but in which you make major decisions. During my mother's time of talking, the whole world was very still for me. All I could hear was her voice. I had three younger brothers, 5 older sisters. Where they were, I have no idea. There was no radio on. There was no one at the piano. There was no running around or wrestling in the yard or in the house itself. It was all completely still. And in that very deep and profound stillness, I heard a voice which I came to recognize also as my own voice that said, "Jimmy, never again on the play field, at school, anywhere, in your anger will you strike out with your fist at another person." That was a decision made. I've kept to that decision since that experience. And then I heard also the voice saying, "And you will find the better way." So that's where I began to practice what I come to understand now as nonviolence. In the area of prejudice and race in Massillon, Ohio. I didn't call it any of that, but what I called it was simply responding with compassion and truth rather than imitating the wrong, imitating the hostility, imitating the hatred. When in 1947 I was a freshman in college, there was a group on campus and in the community that I participated in called a pacifist group, and I participated in that. But I was told again and again that you are too active. Pacifism has no power. And you push too hard. And so I didn't like the term pacifism. And then there was a lecturer on the campus that I went to hear, and he reminded me of Mohandas K. Gandhi of India in nonviolence. And I picked up the autobiography of Gandhi for the first time and read it, began to apply to what I'd been doing in race matters to nonviolence. So that's how I picked up. I had the experiences of turning the other cheek, of going the second mile, of confronting people in high school, in college, in the summer, in camps, and all sorts of places. Of when not being served at Long's drugstore in Indianapolis, Ohio, instead of my going off mad, I sat at the counter for nearly 2 hours, as long as I could sit reasonably, insisting upon service, though they said they could not serve me and would not serve me. That I came to understand to be nonviolent struggle. Now, one of the books I've given you to read is a little book by Howard Thurman called Jesus and the Disinherited. I invite you to that book. Now, when you read the title, Jesus and the Disinherited, I want to say something about that. I don't want you to think supernaturally. You've been fed probably a lot of stuff about this Jesus of the first century of our era. The churches cloak him in all sort of supernaturalism. I want you to drop the supernaturalism. Think of him, think of Jesus of Nazareth, one of the ancient figures of the human race, about whom we know much more than almost any other ancient person, though he never wrote himself anything. We don't even not know if he could write. I want you to see him as one of the extraordinary people in the human race, because one of the ideas of nonviolence that I have is this, that the human race has given us more wisdom than what we realize we have. More poetry, more awareness of what it is to be alive, more understanding of love and compassion and truth and beauty and mystery and wonder than any one of us perhaps can ever completely comprehend. There is wisdom from our past. We've been on this journey 1,000,000 years. And one of my themes of nonviolence is that nonviolence takes the wisdom of the past and says it brought the human race now on a journey of maybe 1,000,000 years. Unique in everything we know. And we ought not to just throw that ancient wisdom out the door and pretend that it's unimportant for the present age. If we have a society where there's a great inability to have social concourse, conversation, to face issues as they are today, a part of the reason for that has to be we have abandoned or are abandoning compassion and love and truth as ancient values that are essential to become alive today. There are a number of principles of nonviolence I will lift up as we move along, but I want to put this one in your thought early on, that we have learned much from the journey of the human race. We need to be appropriating it, which is what almost every discipline in the university situation tries to do. So in 1947, I began using the term nonviolence for what I did, what I said, how I was experimenting, how I was groping in various issues. Janee has mentioned the fact of the hostility and whatnot that she has felt as of the May 4th experience, which from every report was an extraordinary experience. 5,000 people, faculty and students together on the issue of the budget crunch in California and how it affects CSUN. A fair amount of criticism about it. But I remember one of the other places where I moved in a college was that, as I've said, the wisdom of Jesus was very important for understanding human life and myself. And I recognized I would obey no laws of racism or bigotry. Those would not be values that I would live by in high school, later in college. And as I wrestled with that, I came to recognize not only that I would not obey Jim Crow laws, but I also came to recognize that there were other laws that were equally unfair. And I really did not apply as a conscientious objector with the draft boards then. We had a Selective Service Act. You had to register on your 18th birthday, just the men. And I went and registered on my 18th birthday because I was wrestling with this whole business and I didn't know. But I went and registered. But as I reached 19 and 20, I recognized it was a law I was not going to obey. That it was an unjust law. I did not have to do anything with the law. I could have told my draft board, I am headed for the ministry in the United Methodist Church. I could have told the draft board, I'm going to go to theological school, and the draft board would have completely excused me from anything. I thought that was unfair. I did not think that I, at age 18, because I was a pre-ministerial student, should have that prerogative of then not having to do with a law which I was increasingly concerned for its basic human dignity and fairness. So I sent my draft cards back to my local draft board. I sent letters with those cards. Eventually was arrested, eventually tried, and the campus was in something of a turmoil because of my behavior, which I did not want to do, but felt out of conscience I had to do. I must do. But you know, a very interesting thing happened just a few years ago. In the year 2001, I went back to my 50th anniversary to my college campus. And one of the best-known members of our class, very successful man in the world, in the United States, could not come, but he sent a video to that 2001 reunion. And in that video, he said something like this, to my great surprise. I did not know anything about the video until I heard it and saw it. Video with the others in the class reunion. He said, you know, Jim Lawson was right. We all questioned him in 1950 when this took place in 51. But he said, we have to now acknowledge that our classmate was right about risking jail rather than participating in the Draft Act, fighting the wars in Korea or in Vietnam. Isn't that astonishing? No one asked for that, Janee, but 50 years later it rolls back to say something very differently to me. When you operate your life with a degree of truth and beauty and wonder and mystery and knowledge and understanding, you shape your life in a way that will surprise you at how that life can make significant inroads, period. Now, I've left my script entirely, but I want to come back to one point. I, by this time, expected that we would be showing a film on Gandhi and nonviolence at 5 o'clock, and we'd take the break at 5. Take a break at 5:30, and I'm still going to try to keep that break. But let me make other points this morning, this afternoon, that I want to make. Another world is possible. That's the major point I wanted to make this evening. Another kind of world is possible. We live now in a nation where we are being encouraged to think that what is the best that can be, that no other world is available. We're being a serious effort going on to convince us that we already have the best government we can have. Our policies are the best. That this is the only necessary and essential world. I want to insist that there is another world possible. It's in your minds and in your hearts. And in the information, it's in your visions, it's in your dreams. Not just yours alone, but people like us all around the world have a different sense of what the world can be. I think about this in relationship to Gandhi, and then his relationship to his primary protege disciple in India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who became the first Prime Minister of India. Another world is possible. Gandhi was, of course, a British subject in the colony of India. Our media hammers away at the idea that whatever the problems are, the economic recovery is already taking place. Well, it has not affected the 10%, the 15%, the 20% unemployed. Just in the Los Angeles region, not to speak of the nation, different sets of people, different sets of neighborhoods in Los Angeles will have unemployment levels right now of not simply 10%, but 15 and 20, and even 30% unemployment levels across this massive region of some 13 to 20 million people. For those people, the recovery has by no means occurred. The demand from ordinary people like us have caused the Bank of America to decide to declare a moratorium on foreclosures because the President and the Congress have not yet acted to make that happen, to let people with mortgages become central to the recovery, apart from the collapse of the bank and also, I will say it boldly, the cheating of the banks and investment institutions over the last 20 years. Our country today is a country of change. In the year 2010, we are suffering still the consequence of the 60s. And I'm going to specify this as an illustration. In the 60s, before most of you were born, we had what some scholars have called the politics of assassination. In a period of about 5 or 6 years in the 60s, beginning with 1963, John F. Kennedy, a young man, was assassinated as president. Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. Medgar Evers, a young black man who was bold enough to challenge the closed society of Mississippi, was assassinated in 1963. Then Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, as well as also a young man, Robert Kennedy, on the brink of beginning to run for the presidency of the United States, was assassinated. And there were a number of others. But I named these 5 people for a major reason. They were all young, emerging, undeveloped men active in public life. All of them, 5 of them. I had the privilege of watching them emerge and grow and develop, up close with Martin King, up close with Robert Kennedy. They were all well-learned people, some with degrees, Malcolm X without any, but a highly well-read human being, if ever there were any such person in the world. They were bold enough to speak up about problems in the country, and bold enough to call the nation to a public examination and conversation. And King was bold enough when he saw the opportunity in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955 to help organize 40,000 people in the Montgomery bus boycott. He did not run away from it. He accepted the challenge and organized himself, and so became, in fact, in the United States, the first person to call upon ordinary people to engage in nonviolent direct action against Jim Crow law and segregation. And to see that it gave people a power that was beyond their imagination, that would create changes that they could not think about at that time. Now, the politics of assassination, it wiped out these men. In all of the instances that I've listed, they were first-rate human beings still becoming alive and more human. No nation can allow a period of time when you simply kill outstanding younger people who are growing up and working in the public arena for the change of all the people, and then still be on course for its destiny in history. Can't be done. And no modern nation has had such a decade in its life. We suffer at the national level. We suffer from the perspective of the presidency. We suffer in relationship to the political parties. We suffer at the point of the corporatization of our nation and of our democracy, so that 300 million people do not count, but only the corporations matter. In the present election across the nation, the Chamber of Commerce has acquired literally millions of dollars, putting them in elections in every single state of the union. The Chamber of Commerce has never been, in my experience, on the side of education for all the people. Never been on the side of eliminating Jim Crow law and practice. It is not on the side of national minimum wages for working people. It's never supported health care for all. It did not endorse the 1960s platform for Head Start. I do not know if in my own limited experience, the Chamber of Commerce has supported a single platform that would bless and enhance the lives of ordinary people in the United States. When in 1996, a group of us in the clergy and working people united and called for the city of Los Angeles to pass a living wage ordinance that said that every worker on a contract from city funds would make a minimum of $10 an hour. That's not a lot of money. A minimum of $10 an hour or a minimum of $15 an hour according to the category of the work. The Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Business Association, appeared with us in City Hall and in the chambers of the Los Angeles City Council to say no. So I lift this up as part of the reality we must accept if we're going to see that another world is possible. We have major institutions that are not on the side of public discourse that is honest, open, truthful, and adequate to face ourselves and our situation. We have major institutions that if we have a social cancer in the body of America, it would prefer us to die from that social cancer than to put it on the table for collective, thoughtful, investigative conversation that might help us to see where we are so that we can then shape where we think we need to go. I want to give one other illustration of this from the life of Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. We have major issues across Central Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, northern India, Kashmir, and kind of a broad area that a variety of forces would like to control. Gandhi and Nehru represent the first national leaders and the first leaders who became known around the world, who opposed and wanted to change the colonial system of 500 years. Gandhi was called the father of his country by Nehru and others. Nehru became the prime minister of 350 million people who were committed to becoming a democratic society. An astonishing story. So they were the first to oppose the 500 years expansion on the part of Europe and Western civilization to dominate and control the world. That subcontinent of 350 million people became the first nation to break out of a European empire, the British Empire. Gandhi and Nehru were among the first major voices anywhere in the world who called for the equality of all people. They wanted to abolish the caste system of India. They wanted to abolish the inequalities of women back in the 1920s and 30s in India. Time magazine in the year 1999 and again in the year 1998 and 99 said that the two outstanding citizens of the world for the 20th century were Albert Einstein and Mohandas Gandhi of India. Einstein because of physics and relativity thesis and what it did to allow science to break free, especially physics. Gandhi because of what he did as the father of a country that broke with the British Empire and did it through what he called satyagraha, or nonviolence. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that which took place in the 1940 to 1960, 1970, in the United States, we had nothing to do with it. We wanted none of it. We created the Cold War in 1945-47, and we said the world must be organized around anti-communism, anti the Soviet Union, and the advantages of the United States. Gandhi and Nehru said that the world is bigger than the Soviet Union or the United States. There are more options for the human family, so they would not join the Cold War on either side. As a consequence, they were both called communists by many of our policymakers in the United States in 50, 49, so forth and so on. Now, the point I make is that therefore meant that most of what was printed in the United States about Gandhi and Nehru in those years were negative matters, not at all acknowledging a scientist offering a new science on conflict and social change in the right directions, and a prime minister of the largest democracy that the earth had ever known, with a strong message on the fundamental equality of all the people of India. It is a problem today because Gandhi and Nehru would not listen to in the 1940s, and the British colonial office made the decision to create an Islamic state, Pakistan and India, to divide up the continent and make two countries, even though India, remaining from the division, had more Islamic citizens that did the Pakistan that became the Islamic State. The decisions that we are reaping today come from the Western advance of colonialism of 500 years, primarily aimed at, quote, the preservation of Western white civilization and the control and management of the earth into the 21st century that would allow the resources of the earth to still move through the Western banks, the American banks, the Western corporations, the American corporations, rather than devise a new formulas which would allow the resources of Africa to largely remain in Africa, or the oil in Central Asia to bless the women and children of Central Asia and elsewhere across the face of the earth. But that globalism of the 21st century will fail because it is not rooted in the 7 billion people who inhabit this planet. It's not rooted in our ancient history that has more to say to us than modern warfare or modern technology. It has no foundation in history or in truth that can be lasting. We cannot have a public discourse unless we discover why we are in the situation we're in, unless we can dissect it, And unless out of it we come to a different perspective both about ourselves and about our scene. The power of nonviolence is this, that it insists that in each human being there is unimaginable power of life. And where we discover that power, where we use that power, where we organize that power among people, we can engender an energy, a vision, and movements that will astonish not only us, but astonish the earth. The truth of the matter is that in the last 100 years, nonviolence has created more change on every continent than all the wars that have been fought. Nonviolence on meager budgets produce more results, lasting results, than all of the expenditures that have been used in military purposes and war purposes for the last 80 years. And I want more than any other thing in these conversations to get you see you that another world is possible, because at our fingertips there is a history of struggles that will teach us that we can have a better world if we are willing to adopt and use the methodologies and the theories and the values that can sow the seeds for a better world. Now, I've jumped about this evening, but we're going to take our break, 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for conversation. And I trust that there will be some who will disagree with me and want to to push me further along the line. You've been very attentive. So let's take a 15-minute break.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Dr. Koester, for being here. Yeah, and thank you. We will use it along the way for sure, because the videos are very important, a part of information and all. The events in the 20th century of how many nations, many peoples made progress in the direction of self-government is an unheard story in the United States. But it is one of the great moments in human history. And it is going to reshape history in the next 100 years. The story of how people broke out of colonial governance and began trying to shape their self-determination. And we have these videos from the book, A Force More Powerful, and we're going to show them and talk about them, because they demonstrate the whole business, the whole power of nonviolent struggle and action. But we will not show that film again this evening, but we'll get it in one of the workshops or one of the future lectures. All right. Where do we want to begin? Who wants to visit? Who wants to talk? Say something. Yes, ma'am. We have a microphone for you. Yes, you do.
Okay, I'll stand up. While you were talking, I was very excited about what you were saying. But I'm also very troubled. And I'm troubled by what Naomi Klein refers to as psychic numbing, and the kind of incredible passive attitudes of so many people who are just, texting about it, texting their noses, texting away, and the world is falling apart around them, and there's just no sense of the community and standing up and becoming an activist. And I don't know how that can be changed, and that's, I think, the thing that's troubling me the most. I was hoping you had an answer.
So you're concerned for the numbers of people who were texting away?
Text.
Yeah.
About maybe nothing. About trivia.
Psychological, that people in this world know about their opinions, not us.
Yeah.
We're in a mentality of staying in our own lane. How do we get think? How do we get people to look up? That's the question.
Did she cover what you were saying?
It's like that.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of people just are ignoring the things that are going on and the injustice that's happening, and they're shopping or texting but not paying attention and not seeing themselves as actively able to do so.
All right. Yes, sir.
If you had to point out one significant sort of uniting theme for this century or for this generation that will actually is good enough reason for anybody to unite. I mean, in the 60s we had a civil rights movement which was united against, I think, racial and whatever injustices. What would you pinpoint as maybe being the number one thing for our current generation, which is maybe would be the most troubling thing for you, or most number one cause for unity and maybe non-violence? What can you do? What is that one thing that we can direct our attention to?
I don't think that I can do that, nor can anyone else. I think the issues that your generation has to discover must be the work that you do, not what I do. I can help organize on my own level and in my own environment, but you can't predict a socio-political movement that is going to alter history in your own country or someplace else. That's almost unpredictable. And it's one of the reasons why movements in the United States have never been predicted by observers and others, in spite of the unrest that's been evident. So I have my concerns, and I relate to those and try to work on them, but I don't think anyone can really do this for any generation. I think that has to come out of the generation itself. But the issues are everywhere. No 10 ways about that.
Hi. My question for you is, you were talking about how, there are people in that, they believe that, the earth is flat.
Yes.
And that but you still respect them even though you know that it's fundamentally wrong
Yes.
because there's all this evidence. But my question for you is how do you, how or are you supposed to have respect for people who don't respect other people? Like, for example, like racist people, or like, are you supposed to have respect for those? Because, I mean, that is a view for them. Like, are you supposed to have respect for them as well? Or, I mean, that's my question.
All right, that's a very powerful question, and it's one of the essential issues of the human family. How do you have respect for people who disrespect you, who may be racially biased, may be sexist, may be people who believe you have no right to live, so forth and so on? And that's not something that is conventional wisdom. The status quo is not supporting that. As the President mentioned in relationship to the hostility in our society as a whole, the talk shows, media, so forth and so on. So how do you get to that question? That's a part of the issue. Now, how many of you think that your life is meant to be? Let's see the hands. How many people think that your life is actually meant to be? You're not an accident. All right? Now, I keep saying your life is precious, and that's true for every single one of us here. It's unique, and yet it is similar within the human spectrum and within the human family. You have different DNA, different fingerprints, different gene pattern, different hair, break down the inside of the hair and all, than anyone else in the human race insofar as we know. So you are both unique, and yet you're unique within the spectrum of humanity. So you have that precious life. Now, the question is only partially how do we respect those who don't respect me? That's only maybe half the question. The first part of that question is, do I really respect my own life and gift with all of the warts and values? Do I really accept myself as gift, as precious? Do I use my own life well? Do I nurture my own life well? For all of us, a part of respect for your life is learning about life and your own life. A lifelong commitment to learning is an essential part of respecting your own life. The degrees are important, but the degrees are only sort of road signs along the way in your journey for learning. They're sort of special places. So the other part of that question is, do I respect myself? Now, is it possible for me to respect me and then not respect you? Is that possible? For me to really respect my own life and not respect you? Is that possible? I would say as a theologian, it's not. I would say it's not possible. I would say as a sociologist, it's not. That if you have no respect for yourself, you will not respect others. If I respect myself, then I cannot put others outside of that circle of such respect. Now, the ancient wisdom is that we are all in the same boat as human beings. That the people who disrespect others have really are trying to put themselves outside the realm of their own humanity. They're trying to cover up, destroy, and break down their own humanity. There are then, of course, tools for trying to develop this. I did not have a document prepared, which I have a copy of but I didn't bring that folder with me, did I? No. But I will do it at the next workshop and maybe at the next lecture. There is ancient wisdom that insists that you do not learn to respect yourself and others if you imitate the people who disrespect you. So I would like to, and I will bring that document with me the next time, and we'll make copies of it to give each of you a copy of it. But this is part of the book, Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. Now, Howard Thurman makes a number of startling themes there that are important. But one of the startling themes is that when you are being victimized, when you are being pushed around, intimidated, when you are being hurt and broken, when you are being oppressed with sexist laws or racist laws, when you are being structured into poverty, the tendency is for you to begin to dislike and hate yourself under those circumstances. To even pretend that I'm being structured into poverty because I'm no good. So Howard Thurman says that there are 3 hounds of hell that are always jumping on the oppressed person. Anger, deception, and hatred. Now, when you've had someone throw at you an insult, you will remember how you felt and you wanted to strike back. You want to remember your anger. All right. So Howard Thurman points out that when you're in a bad situation in life, anger, deceit, and hatred can destroy your life. So he says until he wrote it, and I found the book in around 1950 the first time, I had never heard a preacher or a theologian say that. But he says that the gospel of Jesus is a survival kit for people who are being disrespected. The gospel of Jesus is a survival kit for people who are being disrespected, who are being oppressed, abused, pushed around, lynched, vilified, intimidated. And what does he mean by that? Well, the passage I will explicate for you with the copy when I bring it with me and make copies of it, comes from Matthew, which is a book in the New Testament of the Christian Bible, Matthew 5:38 to 48. Is one of the major teachings of Jesus that influenced Gandhi in developing nonviolence and saying, not in developing nonviolence, but in saying that nonviolence is what I'm about, what I'm going to do, what I should do. in that, I'll give a very specific example. Galilee, where Jesus lived in a part of what is now Palestine in Israel, was occupied by the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire had a rule that said anytime a legionnaire or a legion soldier was walking, let's say, from Nazareth in Palestine to Capernaum, maybe 9 or 10 miles away, that soldier, that legionnaire, that Roman citizen could see this usher along the road and say, "Boy, carry my pack." And by law, he, in an occupied part of the empire, had to carry that pack for 1 mile. So Jesus in this little passage says, now you can't do anything about that Roman law, because it's not just in Galilee, it's also in Greece. Now that's not Jesus' explanation, but that's what he's assuming. You can't do anything about that law. And you go pick up that pack and walk that mile all the time, raging at this soldier who may be also in bad shape as you are. You can just be angry and cuss the soldier out the whole mile. Jesus offers, that's one possibility. Or Jesus says, on the other side of the coin, if you're forced to go 1 mile, you can decide to go to 2 miles. Because what you do is something else. You see this Roman soldier, or this soldier from Gaul, or from the barbarians from Germany, or from Greece, or from what is now Iran. You can see this soldier as a fellow human being like yourself. And instead of raging mad at him, you can try to talk to him and get a conversation going and find out about him. And Jesus says, you can't control that law, but you can manage your own life. So instead of living by the anger and rage, walk the 2nd mile. So this is a tough thing to do. But the heart of that idea is that your life is your own life. You may not be able to manage anybody else's life, and most of us learn that we cannot. But this is my life, and I can make choices for my life, even under the worst circumstances. I have that kind of power to make a choice about myself under the worst cloud or scene. So a part of the task of respecting others is to respect one's own self and to grow in what is called compassion. Compassion is a better word in many cases than love, because love we think has to be connected up with romanticism or sentimentality, but compassion has the idea behind it that you see yourself as another human being like this human being, even though different circumstances, different language, different culture, different religion, different size, different color eyes, different color hairs, different length of fingers. You can still see yourself and this other person, even this worst person, as somebody as nevertheless being human. And so then a part of what in this text what is this word, do not violently resist the person who does you wrong. Do not violently resist the evildoer. If you imitate the person who mistreats you, then you have escalated mistreatment. This is Gandhi now. So Jesus reads, do not violently resist. Do not do an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth to somebody who wrongs you. You put into the environment, into your space, a different approach. That different approach will allow you to become more human and to be more alive at the same time as it offers your quiet but determined resistance to the wrong that has been done you. Now, that's a long story, but we're going to come back to that and talk some more about it because it is one of the critical questions of nonviolence. Nonviolent theory is that as your life has power to be human, to love, to achieve purpose, to grow and be, so other lives are the same, and that in conflict, you be the person who maintains a level-headed awareness of the humanity of the people with whom you are contending. That's an important facet of nonviolent thought. Yes.
All right. I have two questions. I don't know if I should ask them both. Should I try?
Go ahead, help yourself.
All right. Number one is in my history class, I don't know, several years ago, they were talking about civil rights, and they said that nonviolence wasn't the only thing that led to civil rights. It was a combination of nonviolence as well as some of a tiny bit as well of the violence of other groups like the Black Panthers and other. Do you think that's true? What would you say?
No, it's not true.
Okay. All right. So
I can just say that boldly. His, if you heard the question, if we were to break down the role of the Deacons for Defense and the Committee for Self-Defense that was in Wilmington, North Carolina, there are 3, 4, 5 committees that had self-defense notions. Those committees never took any offensive action to do the dismantling of racism. They were much more the rhetoric of violence in the United States than the creative strategizing for justice and equality. There were people in the movement who had guns in their houses. Because after all, you're living a dangerous situation where in Montgomery or Greenville, Mississippi, the Ku Klux Klan could ride in the middle of the night and raid your house, burn it down. So there were folk in the movement who had guns in their homes that they would use to protect themselves if their homes were attacked. But when those same people went downtown in Ruleville, Mississippi to register to vote, they did not carry those guns with them. They knew that would be disastrous. Nonviolence was not just simply a theoretical form of morality, it was also the practical awareness of the situation that required a different kind of behavior if you were going to get change rather than a multiplicity of violence. So we taught nonviolence both from the theoretical perspective but from the strategic perspective. Does that make sense?
yes.
And that's where I remain in my own thinking and teaching.
All right. Second question. When they first presented you, you said that you're in favor of like several different rights, and as a reverend, I wanted to ask you, how do you convince other clergymen of your faith who probably dissent in some gay rights and support probably like Proposition 8 and stuff like that, because they believe that's a part, like an application of moral laws inscribed in Scripture? What do you think about that?
There is no moral law on homosexuality in the Jewish or Christian Bibles.
Okay.
So those clergy who say that there is such a moral law, probably they really do not read the Bible that much. They have not studied the Bible that much. I speak from experience. I've read the Bible since about age 4, and I read it over and over and over again, from cover to cover. There's no such word in the Hebrew language or the Greek language of the Scriptures such as sexual, homosexuality, or heterosexuality. There are no such words. Those words are our words in the 20th century, our concepts. So, beg pardon? I'm not sure about the Quran, but I do know about the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bibles. So how do you operate with other clergy? Well, I really don't that much. I mean, I organize around certain community issues, and the people who want to come and participate, the people I recruit, have a willingness to come and participate. If so, fine. So we go and do the work that we need to do. The folk who are more ideological than they are compassionate, for the most part, they think clergy like me represents something that's not authentic.
What do you think about the boy, 18-year-old boy you were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Who jumped off the George Washington?
Yes, yeah.
What do you think that we need to do more as like people to help, like, homosexual gay people?
Well, she's asking the question about the 18-year-old who jumped off the committed suicide because of intimidation, harassment around gay issues. What should be done? Well, I think CSUN people should begin at CSUN to see what the situation is here, and then to see how they can approach it from a campus perspective. I think that we also need to begin in our families to put these topics on our agenda in our families, and to talk about them and to try to approach them in the best way we can, with compassion and understanding. I think we should learn about these subjects as much as we can, so that then we can come to a reasonable approach. Our aim should be healing of our problems, solving of our problems, and not exaggerating them for division. The way towards unity is by having an attitude that these matters in our campus or in our home, or community, are opportunities for our becoming stronger, better, wiser, healthier people, and that that's quite possible, and to work from that perspective and that aim.
Well, so on the technique of developing one's ability to work nonviolently, I get the theoretical idea. I'm just wondering, what are the techniques for the inner transformation?
For the what?
The inner transformation, because it seems like
All
there's
right.
a lot of times there would be like a, immediate gut reaction to take a swing if somebody takes a swing at you. That's the first question. And I have another one too. So should I give you both of them, or I hear the other one
Are
too?
they connected?
Yeah, they kind of are.
Okay, good.
So the second one is, I get the theoretical, and so on an individual basis, I can see how it works where between the meeting with the other, there's something that happens, and there's some, you describe kind of a mystical thing that can actually happen between opposing sides that can actually help heal or change something. But what my confusion then is more with when it comes to issues regarding corporations, because they're not human, and nowadays they're all spread out through the world, so that even the old boycott things that might have worked with smaller institutions or localized regions may not work nearly as well because it's corporations are worldwide now. So that's the second part, which is related to the first question too.
All right. I think that at this level in the 21st century, we have to be working at the personal and the local levels before we can take on, let's say, ExxonMobil, the largest corporation in the world, which is one of the most perplexing corporations in the world. That at this level, we need to be working at getting ourselves together and organizing at the grassroots level. Now, very obvious. If I could wave a wand tomorrow or tonight and unite 300 million people in the United States to deal with ExxonMobil, the power of 300 million people would be beyond the imagination of ExxonMobil. If anyone, but the difficulty with our being human is that nobody can do that magic. There is no cosmic spectacular that we can expect can do that. So the work of organizing ourselves and coming to a common sense of purpose and goal is the hard work. And so how do you do it? You do it by practicing it, making it an experiment, and do it one day at a time. Make it important in your own life experience. My experience is that after I slapped that child in the 4th grade and went on my way, and my confrontation with my mother, though it was an absolutely wonderful and peaceful encounter, I changed. And as I practiced a different style, a different way of response, I was transformed personally. By the time I was in high school, I had a very profound sense of compassion for all the folk I lived with and worked with and played with and went to school with, whether they were Jewish, white, Catholic, Mexican, whatever they were, whoever they were, it didn't matter. Even if they were somebody that I thought was on the wrong path, I discovered I had compassion in my heart for that person by the time I hit high school. Now, this was a surprise for me. I did not know that that would happen. So that in high school I had all sorts of wonderful experiences with people of other faiths, of other races, other attitudes. We had some major discussions in that little community. It wasn't that little, about 29,000 people, but in that high school we had amazing discussions. So you do not get transformed by talking. You get transformed by acting on it one step at a time, stumbling, learning from it, successes and failures, weaknesses and strengths. And as that happens, you will be changed. You will be surprised at the flow of energy in you and life in you, and at the opportunities to effect change. What are the techniques? Well, all right. I mean, there are all sorts of techniques, but I think that the most important technique is for you to believe that you can do it, and you just simply try to do it. I think that's the most important technique. Jesus said in this passage, in Matthew 5:38-48, someone hits you on the one cheek, turn the other cheek. Well, that's a pretty bold thing to do. It's a very hard thing to do. If someone hits you on the cheek, the tendency is that the adrenaline will rush to the mind and you're going to be terribly angry, right? Isn't that the tendency? Yeah. What is this person doing? But Jesus said, maybe Jesus said something like this. Okay, you got hit in the one cheek. Count to 10. Stand still and count. And then turn the other cheek. See what happens. Now, I read books that give illustrations of this all the time. There's a book, for an example, called Living with Racism, The Black Experience for the Middle Class, by a man by the name of Joe Fagan, who's a sociologist out of Texas, though he's earlier out of Florida. And that book interviews with mostly black people who work in all sorts of institutions and face hostile experiences. And to me, it's a marvelous book because of the numbers of ways that people reported in their anonymous interviews for this book, how they responded to a sexist incident, a racial incident in the workplace. And almost all the time, they report, not in these words, they would sort of be calm for a few moments and collect themselves, because the incident is always a surprise. And then they would respond. And they advise me, at least, you can't respond to every incident. And sometimes you cannot respond on the spot. You may need to take that person aside that afternoon and talk with them privately. Or you may need to wait for a couple of days and we come back but that you can turn the other cheek, walk the other mile, and you gain great courage and strength by doing so. So are there techniques in nonviolence? There are. We'll come down to a point where Gandhi found some different techniques, weapons, I sometimes call them. But in a book by Gene Sharp, The Politics of Nonviolent Action, which is a research document on nonviolence in the first half of the 20th century that goes back to recorded history as far back as 4,000 and 5,000 years, to the extent that he could do that. And he records 198 techniques of nonviolence that are to be found in the experience of human beings across our centuries. 198 examples. And he lists them all in that book. So there are scholars now who are collecting the techniques and putting them down on paper, so that there is a growing range of evidence upon the techniques that people have used to move in a compassionate, nonviolent fashion in many different kinds of situations. No. No. Because we know that in our American history in voting, we have been able to stuff the ballots. We've been able to manipulate an election. We have, we've had like the Tammany Hall Party, Tammany Hall group in New York for 40 years. They manipulated elections for New York. In Kansas City, Missouri, had another gang. In Memphis, Tennessee, the Crump Machine. Chicago, the Daley Machine. We can manipulate elections. We can, as we found out over the years. So election is an important vehicle. If the governors, the legislators, the mayors, city councils, and citizens saw the elections as one nonviolent technique for self-government, it would vastly improve what we do about elections. But it is not. The most important nonviolent technique for democracy is a well-informed, engaged citizen who's prepared to take risk in order to advance human rights, civil rights, equality, and the rest of it. So engaged citizens is the most important technique for democracy. All right. Yes, ma'am. My last question, and it comes from the mother of Samantha.
So Janee alluded to this idea that you've worked with many groups over the last 56 years. In particular, she said the last decade you'd been very, very active.
Right.
So I was imagining that many of those groups in the last decade have been working with new technologies, social media platforms, etc. And I'm curious, how do you think new technology is impacting the science of nonviolence? And in particular, are new media platforms enhancing knowledge or further impacting the knowledge gap by marginalizing disenfranchised groups restricted by access?
Mm-hmm.
And can you say that 3 times fast?
No,
I'm just kidding.
Now let's talk about this down the road because I think it's an important issue, and I have not really dealt with it honestly. I think I can say that about myself. I think that you who have grown up with the new technologies must be aware that technology will not create justice or a citizenry of engaged living and loving. That community takes us human beings face to face and working together to enlarge ourselves, family, congregation, community group, political group, social group, of all kinds. The technology may be pushing to further control us and to diminish our responsibility. So there are a lot of a lot of issues here that need to be examined. I see that some of the technology is very useful to get information out fast, but the whole business of human commitment and dedication and willingness to risk is the critical thing still for all of us. So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.